Well, hello everybody and welcome to our latest video on mental health and wellbeing during the COVID situation here in Canberra. Unfortunately, we're not live this afternoon as we are all learning there's sometimes technical glitches. So today we're just going to have a chat with my special guest, Nesh Nikolic, and then we'll post this on Facebook later. So I'm sorry we won't be able to have live questions, but the good news is we've had lots of people sending in questions in advance. So we've got quite a bit of material to cover today. As I said, we've got a terrific guest today, Nesh Nikolic, who is a clinical psychologist at Strategic Psychology and also the host of the Better Thinking podcast. And you'll see this when Nesh joins the conversation. He looks like a total pro in his own studio there. So we have got a bunch of questions coming. We'll try and cover as many as possible today. Thanks so much for joining in, and particularly for those who've already sent their questions. Before I come to Nesh, let me tell you about one of the latest innovations from the ACT government. As you know, there's been a lot going on in recent weeks with the two economic support packages that the government has released, as well as a range of other measures we've been dealing with to try and help our communities through this challenging period. Today, there is a new COVID helpline here in Canberra, which has been set up to support the community during this time. The helpline is now live and it operates from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. each day. You can reach it on 6207 7244. Now, there's lots of information available through the helpline that can provide COVID-19 health advice and referrals, requests for advice and information about the economic stimulus packages that have been released, as well as requests for assistance by people who are vulnerable or isolated during this period and maybe need some practical assistance with accessing groceries or other matters like that. Also, for people who are having to quarantine, you can seek that practical support through the helpline. So there's lots of resources there, and this is really about helping people connect to services if you are struggling to find them in some other ways. So that number again, we'll put it in the chat box at the bottom of the conversation here. But if you need that support, the COVID-19 helpline is now live. Now let me go to our guest today, Nesh Nikolic. As I said, Nesh is a clinical psychologist based here in Canberra with over 15,000 hours of one-on-one therapy experience. He is passionate about people, and this comes across in his non-judgmental approach towards others. And Nesh has guest lectured and provided all-day workshops at the University of Canberra, and he's also been invited to present at TEDx events held at the University of Western Sydney and also here in Canberra. He provides training to organisations working with mental health issues and has been involved in supporting professional athletes and sporting teams with achieving optimal performance. He's also trained psychologists, counsellors, social workers, occupational therapists and other therapists around Australia in acceptance and commitment therapy. And as I said at the beginning, he's also the host of Better Thinking, a podcast centred around conversations exploring practical applications of psychology in everyday life. And we'll put a link to Nesh's podcast in the chat box as well, so that if you want to follow up on that, he's done some really interesting programs and I'm sure you will enjoy them if you have a chance to have a listen to some of those. But Nesh, thanks so much for joining us today. What's your take as a clinical psychologist on the COVID-19 situation and how our community is going?
Thanks, Shane. I mean, the things we can really appreciate and understand with this COVID experience at the moment from a community perspective is everyone's experience is a little bit different. Whether it's being a mum at home looking after kids that usually would be at school, or whether it's someone working from home that was traditionally obviously, in an office, everyone's got a different story, but we can definitely appreciate whatever someone's feeling at the moment is very, very normal. I think it's something we've got to appreciate that there is a great diversity of experience, and whether it be feeling anxiety, whether it being feeling indifferent even, there's going to be lots of different experiences. So we're really looking at a time of adjustment, and with adjustment can be lots of stress, obviously. But rather than moving away from judging how we feel, I think it's really useful to be looking toward focusing on the things that we can do, whether it be, connecting with our community, helping others, friends, family, and the like. And there's so many services that can be accessed. Obviously, Psychologist, there's a telehealth option that's been made available, and many, NGOs and other services around Canberra. So I think, as a community, I think we're doing quite well, notwithstanding that there's a lot of people who are going through quite a lot of hardship and challenge at the moment.
I think that's an interesting point that you make around the diversity of experiences that are out there. For some people will be going through all sorts of different things, as you've outlined. I think many of us particularly feel for those who've lost employment, lost shifts, lost income during this period. That obviously brings an enormous amount of stress for some people.
Absolutely, and that's where we find a lot of stress, anxiety, even sometimes hopelessness and helplessness arise, is that there is uncertainty in the community. And that, I think, is what is really underpinning much of the angst at the moment, that we're all struggling to find some level of certainty. You know, what does that mean? How long is COVID going to go for? How long are shops going to be closed for? Will I be able to engage with my employer afterwards? You know, what does this mean for my children's education and the like? So I think from a community perspective, this adjustment toward trying to find certainty again in really what is an uncertain time and an unprecedented time is our great challenge.
Yeah, certainly amongst some of the experts I talk to, their message is it's reasonable and expected to feel uncertainty at this time. It's natural. It will, I guess, knock you off balance a little bit, but you shouldn't feel that that's somehow extraordinary, that's sort of what everybody's experience is at the moment, and to, I guess, be accepting that is a normal reaction to be having.
Absolutely. We do tend to find a compounding effect where we're already going through an uncertain and challenging time, and then sometimes we can go out and place an extra layer on that by saying, I shouldn't be feeling this way. And it could be I shouldn't be handling it this way because I see others that outwardly appear as though they're handling it better, or I shouldn't be feeling my feelings, I'm overreacting, when in actual fact we all have a different way of responding, and we're really trying to be supportive for one another, each other, and do some natural self-help or self-care activities as well to get through this time. Find some routine again, so that we're not burdened with layer upon layer upon layer, because most of us are also trying to support others, not only just ourselves, whether it be family members or good friends that are going through a particularly hard time.
Yes, I think one of the key messages through this has been a lot of people talking about being kind to others, having that kindness, but I think what I hear in your comments, Nesh, is a reminder to be kind to ourselves as well.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of my work in my one-on-one therapy is very much based on one's personal judgment on themselves. Whether we have, which is a very common experience of, I'm not good enough, I'm not coping well enough, I'm an imposter, I should be doing better. People procrastinating and thinking that procrastination is abnormal. Everyone procrastinates. I'm sure you do, and I certainly do plenty. It's actually a part of how we do life. We can't be on and productive and doing things all the time. And likewise, in this situation, we can't all be strong the whole time, and feel certainty and confidence about the future when there are lots of unknowns. So I think removing judgment, self-judgment, and also judgment towards others is vitally important at the moment. Yeah,
thanks. Well, I like what you say about procrastination. I often, find myself procrastinating at times, thinking, no, I've got to get on with it. But yes, I'll take that piece of advice on board myself. Let's jump into some of the questions that people have sent into us, because we've got a terrific selection today, and thanks to everybody who has taken the time to send some questions in. We will work to get through them. First one comes from Dan, and he says, the New South Wales approach to being outside seems highly punitive. Does the ACT government agree there are aspects of daily life people need to or should undertake outdoors, for example, a walk in the park alone or with a life partner, that present little or no risk to the community but are important for preserving mental health? Well, Dan, what I can say to you is that, yes, I think it is important that you do take those opportunities to get outside and look after your mental well-being through some physical activity. Of course, in the ACT, you can exercise outdoors as a way of keeping your mental health, but also whilst doing the social distancing that we're being asked to do. We're very lucky in Canberra. We've got lots of great green open spaces, and sometimes it can be as simple as getting out in your own backyard if you've got that. or even getting on your balcony if you're in an apartment in the sunshine. These things can be really important. And I think part of the conversation in my mind is it's important that we stay focused on what we can do as much as what we can't do. I think once we get into that space of feeling very perhaps beaten down by the requirements that are in place, and they're there for good reasons, but focusing on some of the things we can do is really important. Of course, the guidelines are really clear that we should only be leaving our homes to buy food, travel to work, for exercise, or for medical or caring purposes. So, we do need to keep an eye on that question of, do I really need to go out and do this? We are being asked to stay home as much as possible, but certainly exercise is there. And what you'll find, I think, is that ACT policing is taking a much more educative approach, trying to take the community with us, perhaps in a different way to what we've seen in New South Wales. So, Dan, hopefully that answers the question for you. The next question we've had in is from Janet. And Janet has posed a really, disappointing question in a sense. You'll understand why I say that in a second. She says, I myself have experienced a racist, vile language and harassment while shopping at my local Woolies over the last few weeks. Sadly, nothing can be done about antisocial incidents as advised by Woolies because they are not the AFP. This created unnecessary anxiety and stress for when I go shopping for essentials. Although she notes there's still no toilet paper on the shelf. What next? Well, Janet, look, I am so sorry to hear that you've had that experience. I'm really appalled to hear that has happened to you here in Canberra. This is a city that should be better than that. And there is no place for that sort of racist or, frankly, vile conduct in our city. Everybody should feel welcome here in Canberra. And I'm just dismayed that you've had that experience. I'm very sorry for you. My office has taken the opportunity to give the Human Rights Commission a call here in the ACT. I'm amongst my ministerial portfolios responsible for that. And unfortunately, they have been hearing a few reports of complaints of this nature lately, more than they would normally do. And so that's obviously something that's happening in our community. The advice from the Human Rights Commission is that we don't expect Woolies staff to take on the role of the federal police, but in the same way they are taking steps to ensure the safety of their staff by putting up signs that they won't tolerate people who are aggressive towards their staff or not non-compliant with distancing requirements. They do have an obligation to ensure people accessing their services are civil and respectful to each other and comply with vilification laws as well as the public health determinations. So, Janet, if you'd like to follow up with the Human Rights Commission, we'll put their contact details in the chat box. The other thing I would say to everybody is, just as we did through the marriage equality postal vote last year, I think there's a role for each of us to, when we see that sort of inappropriate behaviour in our community, not just to be a bystander, but if it's safe to do so, to intervene, to try and challenge someone to think a different way and to support those who are perhaps being vilified in some form or another. I think we can all think about our own way to approach that. We don't want to create big scenes in the supermarket, but there is a time to step in and support others. And if you think you can do that, I would encourage Canberrans to be supportive in that way as well. Nesh, did you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, absolutely, Shane. I think racism, vile language, harassment, any of this conduct is absolutely abhorrent, and I don't believe it's characteristic of Canberrans as a whole, but sometimes we might encounter that sort of behaviour. I think where we need to kind of shift potentially some of our focus is what can we do in those situations. Obviously, we can't necessarily stop all of that type of terrible behaviour, but what we can do is look at how we respond. And there's a numerous different ways that we can go and respond. I might just share a couple of different versions, but obviously it has to be considered within context. Sometimes I've found that it can be useful to try and actually open up yourself to a more compassionate space of trying to appreciate what is the ignorance or the space that someone must be coming from to be, harassing or to be racist in a public forum or in a public space, and try and understand what it must be like to live their type of life or their sort of life, that perspective that they are being, targeted, or that they are somehow being, threatened by others, whether it be, on a racist level or any other level, that they have to go out and make comments to others, and trying to appreciate that if someone's being, awful using vile language, what it must be like from everyone else as well, because I'm sure if any of us went to a bank teller and used vile language, we probably wouldn't get treated very well. And people who are doing that with others in the community must also be getting treated poorly in return. We can also think about how we can model our response, kind of looking at there being a positive domino effect. If someone is being awful, using vile language or harassing toward myself, if I model how to respond and I show everyone else around, I think that can have a very strong message to the whole community that we're not going to go out and respond to that poor behaviour. And so how we respond is very important, and for us not to go down to their level, or in actual fact to take any of that on board. So I think there's some things that we can do, but that doesn't mean that it's not a completely awful experience for yourself. And I'm really sorry to hear you've had to witness some of that or even experience some of that yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Nesh. There's some really good thoughts there, and it is really disappointing to hear something like that happens in Canberra. I think you're right, though. People often come from a place of fear with those sort of in that kind of behaviour, and that's an interesting way to think about it, the way you've described. Our next question is from Sarah, who's asked, what to do for people who don't use devices very much? I work in an organisation where a lot of staff don't have laptops and work in ops. Any tips for keeping connected with people for whom tech and video conferencing is out of their comfort zone? Well, Sarah, I think a lot of us have been challenged to find some new ways to do things in this, I guess, strange new world that we live in. Nesh, I imagine you have some thoughts on this. What do you reckon?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting sort of space because not everyone is as well versed as others with using tech, and so we kind of have to become innovative, or in some sense go back in time and look at what are the sorts of things that we may have done in the past. We still need to be able to connect with others and feel like we're part of a community. So, there are other means which, in actual fact, I think can be quite enjoyable because they will provide a little bit of novelty. Interestingly, the first probably not novel thing to do is, rather than text, how about we use a telephone? I think traditionally we've used the telephone exceptionally well. So phoning a friend, particularly someone we haven't spoken to for some time, is very accessible to all of us, and we might be able to try and do that rather than judging ourselves for not doing video conferencing or using a Zoom type of response. The telephone is excellent. We might be able to write a handwritten letter to a friend. I know how lovely that would be to actually open up a letter and see that someone's taken the time to express themselves in written form. I think it's a powerful way of putting a message across, and this is why it always feels lovely to get a Christmas card, for example, that's handwritten. I think when we're doing our exercise, for example, or when we are engaging with others, whether it be in the shops, micro gestures are so important. There's so much communication and connection that goes on from that level as well. Whether we nod ahead of acknowledgement, for example, if you're going for a run, both acknowledging that you're out there exercising, keeping fit, whether it be waving, this acknowledgement of others is so important. It tells everyone else that we're connected, we're part of the community, and probably one of the greatest things that we can do in terms of gesturing or demonstrating by action is doing something helpful for another person. Taking your neighbour's bin out, or letting people in front of you when you're driving. One of the most beautiful things I've seen when my wife and I were moving into our street is we saw a neighbour walk across from their home to another neighbour's house and fix their letterbox and paint it. And that nailed it for us in terms of this is the right street for our family. Those sorts of gestures, I think, communicate much more than what words can.
Sounds like you live in a great neighbourhood, Nesh, and certainly I think that idea of being able to help other people is a really good one in this space, Sarah. In thinking about your question, I was thinking, if you are in a position to help somebody, actually learn how to use the tech as well, because you could actually open up a new world for them too, where they We'll be able to perhaps connect better to family members, keep in touch with colleagues while we're working from home. Whilst not everybody is comfortable with the tech, I think it is increasingly available to us and increasingly intuitive. And sometimes people just need that sort of initial bit of help to get themselves going. And you read those reports now how a lot of grandparents these days are on Facebook a lot. They all have iPads, and it's usually can be sometimes the grandchild who's sat down and taught them how to use it. So I think that's another opportunity as well, is where you have got the skills, take that opportunity to open it up for other people and get involved with them. Now, obviously, you need to do it in a socially distancing appropriate way, or physical distancing, as I like to call it, but that's another opportunity as well. We've got a question in from Ritesh, who's asked, some employers are still not understanding and not letting teams work from home where it is possible. How can this be implemented strongly in light of the severity of COVID-19? Look, that's a really interesting question, Ritesh. And I think it goes to a little bit the last conversation we're having, is people are adapting and getting used to new ways of doing things. I've heard a few stories of employers being uncertain how people can work from home. And I guess there's a couple of ways to have a look at it. Certainly there is plenty of online information available. You might be able to draw that to your employer's attention. You can talk to organisations like WorkSafe ACT, who you can give a call to. They are our work safety agency in the ACT government. You can reach them through the COVID helpline, or you can call them directly. They can provide advice to employers. And it might just be a case of sitting down with your team and coming up with a proposition to your employer to demonstrate that you can work from home. The employer may not see the opportunity, whereas you might be full of ideas. So I think there's a number of ways to go about it. Certainly the ACT Public Service has been working very hard, and I know there's been a lot of efforts there. The federal government was probably a little slower, but I know a lot more Commonwealth public servants are now starting to work from home. So I think we're all learning, and I would encourage you to try and have a chat to your employer. But if you're having a bit of a struggle, give WorkSafe a call and they might be able to give you some guidance as well. Now, Nesh, this next question is particularly for you. It's coming from Jennifer. And she says, what do you think is the best way to support people living alone or that are already socially isolated through this time in terms of their mental health and wellbeing?
It's a great question from Jennifer, and I think it's particularly important to look at it not only from a time of COVID and obviously physical and social distancing, probably more physical distancing, as you say, but also from a wider perspective of mental health. There are certainly well-known pillars of well-being or mental health supports, which I think is important to consider, whether it be COVID or whether it be, pre or post. And some of those I might share with you really are there to strengthen our resilience, our buoyancy, if you will. Now, this list isn't really for anyone to try and meet every single one in a perfect way, but rather a guide. And the first one is in actual fact just moving your body. There is a bit of a myth that exercise goes out and makes you feel better. And in some sense, there's research that says, yes, it does. Having said that, there's also an appreciation, understanding that it's not just exercise. It's a deeper conversation than that, and really, it's about moving your body. So there are studies that have gone out and restricted animal, and this is obviously a difficult space, but restricted animals in terms of their mobility. More so about not being able to run and the like, and we see that their mood drops quite rapidly and quickly. And the moment we go out and allow them to have mobility and the like, their mood goes out and improves. We know this when someone injures their leg or is in hospital, we tend to see mood drops. And so being active is super important. So it doesn't need to be exercise, whether it's going out and cleaning up your cupboards, doing a bit of a spring clean, just being active as much as possible is highly important. Eating, good nutritious food. We all know what it's like when we eat, high sugary carb food. We do tend to kind of feel sluggish or, flatter. So eating really, high quality food and maybe that can be sort of discussed with a dietitian and the like, but we know it's highly important. Sleeping opportunities, maybe not staying up late at night, particularly if you don't have responsibilities the following day, trying to kind of stay with the normal rhythm of what nature's offering in terms of the sun going down, sun coming up. And cultivating, nurturing social networks. The opposite would be true when we have, exposure to hostility. We tend to feel more anxious, uptight, nervous, worried. So having good nurturing social networks is highly productive, and this is why so much of the COVID advice or recommendations at the moment is to connect with others. There's certainly mindfulness practice. It's really about appreciation practice, if you will. Engrossing yourself in something that's really important to you, or is a high level interest or a hobby, or being able to appreciate others can be very, very useful. We know that meaningful acts or doing things that are meaningful is something well documented. It's a great book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That's one of those bestsellers that really talks about when someone has direction and purpose, how much more buoyant they are from a mental health perspective. At the moment, I'd say be careful about social media in terms of how much you're consuming it at the moment, or maybe even more nuanced. Let's be really considered about the social media we actually go out and consume. So it's not that social media is a bad thing. It's more so about the selection of what we're reading. So maybe we go to better sources of news, or maybe we even limit how much news we listen to. We might put it aside for a period and focus on other interests. So there's a lot of things that we can do to prop up our mental well-being. And there's a few in there, but I think we really need to go out and think about what are the cumulative things I can do that are in the positive, and try and engage less in those other things that can weigh a little bit more on our shoulders.
Thanks, Nesh. That's a great and really practical list that you've come with there. And as you said, it's not that we have to be perfect at all of them, but there's certainly a guide as to how to, find some of that mental balance for ourselves. And in terms of Jennifer's question, think about how we also support other people as well in sharing some of those ideas. Our next question is in from David. He says, I'd like to discuss the issue current Year 12 students face with the change in home learning and the possible effects on their ATAR. How can we work with universities and TAFE to ensure our 2020 students are given their opportunity to advance their education? Well, David, that's a really important and timely question. And probably since you've sent that in, you might have seen that our Education Minister, Yvette Berry, has confirmed that Year 12 students will have the opportunity to get their ACT Senior Secondary Certificate this year, and also to get their ATAR, or their Australian Tertiary Admission rank, which is obviously really important for getting into university. The ACT Senior Secondary Certificate, unlike some of the other states and territories, actually uses results from school-based assessment in both Year 11 and Year 12. So perhaps unlike the HSC in New South Wales, it's not all about those final exams. That system in the ACT does allow some flexibility in assessment types and scheduling to be adjusted by schools. And I know that at the moment the schools are thinking very carefully about this. They want to make sure that our Year 12 students do get that opportunity to progress. We saw a really clear confirmation in the last day or so that there's no expectation of Year 13. Year 12 students will progress this year. And I hope that's given some of our Year 12 students some confidence and some reassurance that you are being thought about. People are really conscious of making sure you can keep going forward. Year 12 is a pretty stressful thing at the best of times without having COVID-19 chucked on top of it. But rest assured, we are thinking about you, and there will be opportunities to get that both Senior Secondary Certificate and the ATAR score. And I think particularly as we come back to Term 2 in a couple of weeks, you'll see our schools are really geared up and ready to go. Our teachers are working very hard at the moment to produce more online and distance learning content. And I think you'll see people much more geared towards this new way of thinking. So hopefully that, David, that gives you an answer to your question and gives some reassurance to our Year 12 students. Nesh, this next question comes in from Heather, and she says, do you think it's good to discuss stress, that it is normal and it is about how we respond to the changes and increased stress so that it doesn't escalate into anxiety and panic. What are your thoughts on that?
There isn't a single answer for all in terms of whether we should go out and discuss stress and how to normalise it. But I think there are some guides that we could potentially consider between, what we know is helpful. We know that sometimes going out and validating stress, appreciating stress is normal, and it very much is very, very helpful to go out and put that on the table and not try and suppress it, get rid of it. It's kind of like if we talk about a metaphor or analogy of holding it's kind of like holding a ball, in a swimming pool underwater. Sometimes the more that we hold it down, the more that we push down on it, we're fighting with it. There's a struggle that is occurring at the time. And by kind of letting go of the ball, yes, the stress comes out and it's displayed for everyone to go out and see, but it's no longer something that we go out and strain with, that we go out and struggle and wrestle with. And so we can kind of exist while the stress is there, and we might then recognize that everyone else has got a ball that's floated to the surface as well. At the same time, we've got to appreciate there's a balance here about, talking about our stress and, venting and feeling like that's helpful, to a point where we might go out and start to ruminate or spend so much time talking about the stress. And that can be when we, things can escalate, where we get kind of consumed, we ruminate, we kind of spiral further and further into the stress as well. And so it can be also helpful to limit how much time and energy we spend in that space of venting, because it can have that unintended effect as well. We've got to remember stress is normal and it's useful at this time. It reminds us to, whether it be wash our hands and stay 1.5 meters away, or to go out and take action in our lives, because there's certain things that we need to adjust to. So stress isn't necessarily, the enemy. It says something and it's helpful. We don't want to go out and victimize, stress as though it's bad. In actual fact, it's here for very good purpose, and where we can go out and channel our actions to, doing things that might, whether it be, reduce our stress, or maybe it doesn't even reduce our stress, but it certainly goes out and gives us a little bit more certainty. Well, that could be a good thing as well. I think we just need to go out and appreciate, or maybe stop and pause and think about, why am I stressed? What am I experiencing stress, and what can I do about it? And that's obviously, as a psychologist, what we do with our clients in terms of identifying where's this coming from, what's it saying, and how do you want to, respond to this? How do you want to show up in the face of stress?
Now, earlier in the conversation, you talked about sleep being an important consideration, and we've got an interesting question in that context from Emma. She said, some people respond to anxiety by getting very tired and sleeping a lot more than usual. They can't fight it or escape from it, so they're shutting down until it's over. Is it best to let sleeping people lie, or should they try to get up during daylight and get some fresh air and sunshine? Nesh, what are your thoughts on this one?
The context, once again, is important. Some people may benefit from sleeping in a little longer. It might be something that is really more about getting the rest, and we want to go out and facilitate that and support that. Sometimes we can have rigid thoughts about, I'm sleeping too much, or I'm not, supposed to be sleeping during these particular hours. I like to drop the judgment and look at, functionality, in terms of, is this going out and supporting me? So lots of sleep can also be something that activates a lethargy response, or a less motivated response as well. And that's why I think we've got to be kind of considerate about how we look at sleep. It's no different to, if I stay sedentary all the time, I will tend to lose motivation. there's no doubt the fresh air, sunshine, being outside is very helpful from a mental health perspective. But we certainly don't want to be forcing anyone to go out and do so. This is a sort of question that I hear quite often from parents in particular, and there are times where parents might want to, strongly encourage their children to, wake up a little bit earlier, go outside, get off the devices, get some sunshine. But I would encourage people to consider more so their focus on their relationship with encouraging others in terms of being more of a driving force to uphold mental well-being. So, if we're concerned about a loved one who might be sleeping in too long, rather than trying to see sleeping less or getting out in the sunshine as being the solution, I would look at more about connecting with that person, checking in with that person, seeing how they're doing, having a cup of tea, having a conversation. Sometimes in actual fact, just chatting about average normal things as well. So I'm not certainly saying that sleep isn't important, and obviously we definitely need sufficient sleep. Reduced sleep will be quite devastating as well. But I think trying to see the bigger picture in how we can support each other. So, do we let sort of sleeping people lie? I'm not sure. Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Sounds like a little bit is the answer, perhaps. All things in moderation usually seems to be the right answer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Look, we've got one last question, Nesh, and then we're getting very close to time. But Justin has sent us a question saying, how can we adjust our language to ensure that we don't stigmatise people with mental illness? Now, this is, I think, a question that goes beyond COVID times, and in fact is a real challenge for us. As the Minister for Mental Health, it's something I'm very conscious of, is I think we're going quite well in Australia, breaking down the stigma around mental health, but we've still got some distance to go. What's your take on this, Nesh?
First of all, really appreciate the question from Justin, because I'm very passionate about this space. This is one of the things that is going to be front and center of mind for me, for many, many years to come. And it's really about moving away from labels, moving away from providing diagnoses, whether it be, from psychologists, psychiatrists, GPs, and the like. I think mental health professionals, we could benefit we'll provide a better service to our clients in terms of looking at describing the story that someone's going through or the context that someone's going through. So, and a very classic example that comes to mind for me is looking at postnatal depression. That can have a lot of stigma attached to it. You can sometimes feel like, someone's a failure because they're feeling the way that they're feeling after having a child, that, we should, be smiles and celebrating and feel bonded and connected with our children. It's a lovely, enjoyable time, and that's how I should be feeling. But if I go out and describe a story which says there was great anticipation of having, a child, and there may have been some great challenges along the way throughout pregnancy, whether it's feeling sick, whether it's, a change in mobility, whether it be some complications, medical angst as well. Where someone eventually gets to a point, that beautiful point of being able to give birth, but it doesn't go the way that they expected it either. It might be something that, has broken their expectations or was quite uncomfortable. It wasn't the way that they had envisaged for some time. We then might see someone quite naturally be a little bit more socially isolated once they've got a little one, because they're obviously caring for that little one. We might say that their sleep has been incredibly shifted to waking numerous times every night, sleeping very lightly, not being able to sleep during the day. And so, sleep can sometimes be broken, 3-4 hours of sleep, sometimes if that. And we know how much that impacts our mental well-being. The way we feed ourselves changes. Our personal identity goes out and changes as well. So all of a sudden we have to adapt to being, mums, dads, that we've never experienced before. We might also recognise that there's greater strain on finances and the like. There are so many more elements that I could describe of what that might look like. And then if we think about if some of those things are somewhat unfavourable, wouldn't it be reasonable to think that someone, after having a child, which is a beautiful thing, can be a beautiful thing, is under immense stress, pressure, adjustment, difficulties, and might actually feel a little bit down, might feel a little bit low, might feel a little bit disconnected. It's not an unusual mood to consider within that context. And so rather than calling it postnatal depression, I think we can describe the context then, and then just ask the question, how do you think I'm feeling?
Yeah, no, really see your point there, and I think that's really great advice as well. Nesh, we are out of time. We've managed to get through most of the questions today, so thank you everyone for sending them in. Nesh, it's been great to have you as a guest. My guest today has been Nesh Nikolic from Strategic Psychology. If you're wondering where they are, just think Mooseheads. They're right nearby Mooseheads, and I think most Canberrans know that landmark, so it's the easiest way I can describe it. But I've been over to Nesh's practice. They've got a lovely fit out there. But Nesh, it's been great to have you along today. Thanks so much for taking the time, for sharing your advice and your experience with us as we all seek together to get through this challenging period of COVID-19. For people, apologies we weren't able to be live today. The technical issues did get the better of us. We'll sort it out for next time. But we'll let you know when our next event is going to be. Keep those questions coming in. In the meantime, stay well, Canberra. Remember that new government helpline that's available on 6207 7244 if you need to find out COVID-related information from the ACT government. But in the meantime, do focus on your mental wellbeing. Take on board some of the great advice from Nesh today. There's more available online, both in the ACT government website as well as some of those terrific organisations like Beyond Blue, Lifeline and others. Headspace has got some terrific information as well. So stay well, both physically and mentally, and we'll speak again soon. Thanks very much.